It just so happened that two dance shows in Melbourne were both based on Dracula and were performed 2 weeks apart from each other. So I'm going to compare the two. That's it. That's the video. Hi there, I'm Lucy Luxburn, and before we go any further, I am going to give a quick rundown on the story of Dracula. But before anyone goes, we don't need that, everyone knows Dracula. No, that is not true. I have met people in real life who did not know the story of Dracula. I've also met someone who did not know what blacksmithing was, and I met someone else who didn't know who Batman is. Just because something is common knowledge does not mean it is universal knowledge. Okay? Okay. In case you didn't know, this book, Dracula by Bram Stoker, was published in 1897. It draws inspiration from history and folklore, though some of the historical figures are up for debate on whether they actually draw inspiration or not. Vlad the Impaler and Elizabeth Bathory are both very popular theories. Spoilers ahead for a book that is almost 130 years old now, but the simplified version is that a solicitor named Jonathan Harker travels to Count Dracula's castle to help him buy property in London. While he is there, he is terrorized by 3 vampire women who do not get named in the book. Some adaptations do give them names, but they are never given a name in this version. Weeks later, Jonathan manages to escape the castle and ends up in a Budapest hospital. While he's having a bad time, the Count is enjoying an all-you-can-eat seafood buffet as he has stowed away on a boat on its way to London and is eating the entire crew. Once in London, Count Dracula then torments Jonathan's fiancée Mina. Her name's Mina. Count Dracula torments Jonathan's fiancée Lucy and her best friend. No, wrong way. Wrong names. Count Dracula then torments Jonathan's fiancée Mina and her best friend Lucy. Now, Lucy is the most desirable bachelorette, truly the diamond of the season, as she has 3 men trying to marry her. But oh no, she gets mysteriously sick, and the Dr. Van Helsing treating her is like, oh yeah, I know what's happening, but you won't believe me if I tell you, so I'm just gonna say it's acute blood loss, but just hang these garlic flowers all over the room for no reason. So yeah, Lucy and her mother die, and Lucy becomes a vampire but is very quickly slain by Van Helsing and the 3 men that were previously fawning over her. Turns out being undead and filled with bloodlust was a deal breaker. Fine. And then the hunt for Dracula begins. So he tries to turn Mina into a vampire as well, fails, and then flees back to his castle, followed by the hunting party. Van Helsing then takes out the 3 vampire women, and the group then turns Count Dracula into dust. And only one of them is fatally wounded in the process. Hurrah! Happy ending. This book has been turned into many movies, but has also gone on to inspire other books, video games, theatre productions, songs, fan fictions. Probably a lot of fan fictions. You name it, it's probably been created. If you adored Interview with a Vampire, especially the new TV show as much as I did, you have this book to thank for paving the way. Castlevania? Wouldn't exist without this baby. Twilight franchise? Not a chance. I personally have a soft spot for Nosferatu, which helped shape a lot of the vampire lore that we use today. If you want me to go on a full tangent about the copyright lawsuit from Bram Stoker's estate and how the original Nosferatu movie survived, let me know, because that is a fun story. Now that everyone is up to date on the story of Dracula, forget all of it, because these dance performances have their own stories. First up is the Dracula Ballet. Now, this event was very popular. There ended up being a group of about a dozen of us going, and even so, the Melbourne goth community came out in droves for this. I ran into so many people that I knew. This show was at Hamer Hall. Now, if you're not from Melbourne, this is a major concert hall. It sits about 2,500 people and is generally well known for like orchestral and contemporary musicians playing, which I'm explaining this to kind of point out that it is known as a prestigious venue, which is why I was disappointed with the seating arrangement. I was sat in the balcony, and once people were sat in front, I lost view of at least a quarter of the stage. Just constantly doing this to make sure I could still follow the dancers. There was a couple next to me that did keep complaining about the view to me, and when intermission rolled around, they got up and did not come back. Tickets in this section, even like the cheap seats, were still over $100, and they decided that the view was bad enough that it was not worth sticking around for the second half. They're like, not worth the sunk cost fallacy, we're out of here. Since the Dracula ballet, I have seen Cats here, but I was seated in the dress circle, much better view. If I go again, I would recommend more the dress circle or the stalls for seeing shows here. I was initially worried that the stage wasn't going to be big enough for a show like Cats, but the performers made it work. And I will stop talking about Cats now because this tangent could go on for a while. But yeah, the balcony seats, the angle's just, I think it's just the angle, the way the seats are angled down. Yeah, it's not a great view. And I've been in other venues where even like the cheap seats have a really good view. You're just further away or like more off to the side. So that was rather disappointing. Pretty much my only gripe about the venue. I think the dancers themselves did a great job. They did 3 showings of this, 2 on the same day. I went on the Saturday at the 7:30 p.m. viewing, but they had done one at 3 p.m. the same day. I don't know if they rotate the dancers out so they can get a break, but knowing the athleticism of ballet dancers, it would not surprise me if they just powered through. Yeah, I'm not sure if the dancers are rotated out or not, because there were 2 names listed for each of the main leads, though they could also just be understudies, except for the ghost characters, who I'll explain who they are in a minute, but they only had 1 extra name to cover 4 dancers, so they were definitely not rotated out. There were a lot of story changes for this ballet, a lot of them kind of confusing, and had us, like in the intermission, trying to, like, we had our own theories about what was going on. That is until my friend Elizabeth, who had bought the program, showed us that the story was actually written in the program, so that helped explain a lot of what was going on. And she was lovely enough to send me a photo so I can refer back to it. Okay, biggest changes that were obvious. There was no Lucy or any of her suitors, so that part of the storyline completely scrapped. And no Van Helsing, so the original hunting party is no more. The first part of the show is Dracula's backstory. So we see him on a battlefield fighting, and he gets news that his wife has died, and he goes on to do a dark ritual to become a vampire in response. Now, according to the program, this is because he was fighting for the church, and the church killed his wife because they were suspicious of his loyalty. Yeah, I'd be rather pissed off too. It then cuts to Mina's and Jonathan's wedding. So we had lots of dancers in really cutesy colours like yellows and pinks. It was all joyous. And then they get whisked off onto their honeymoon, which just so happens to be at Count Dracula's castle. Interesting choice for most people, but I'm also the type to spend my honeymoon in a haunted castle. Like, I spent my last birthday, I paid money to sleep in an historic jail cell, and I loved it, so I cannot judge. When they arrive at the castle, they do a very romantic dance to Claire de Lune, which is always a pretty song. I think most of the music in this ballet were famous classical pieces. I I think I recognized almost all of them. Obviously, because Dracula is a new ballet, they didn't have a template for the music like they would for Swan Lake or the Nutcracker, so they did have to create their own. Overall, pretty good song choices though. They had like Mussorgsky's Night on Bald Mountain and Rachmaninoff's Isle of the Dead. There was one song near the end that I'm not sure what it was. I think I recognized it, but I did not agree with that song for that particular scene. It did not fit the tone, but I'll come back to that later. Now, after the romantic dance, the couple then go up to the bedroom where they are immediately terrorized by 4 ghosts. Now, these seem to be the replacement for the 3 vampire women in the book. I assume they picked 4 just for symmetry reasons. I'm not sure why they chose ghosts. I think it might, like, the closest thing I can think of is that they wanted to keep the outfits white for stylistic reasons. That's my assumption. I don't know if that's correct. At one point, these dancers were dancing in a spotlight that was shaped kind of like a snowflake, but the way it was hitting them, it almost looked like they were living statues or were wearing body armor. I'm always really impressed by how lighting changes the look on something. It was really cool. The choreography, also really unique for these dancers. The way they were moving their arms in particular and like circling like Jonathan and Mina very much gave Birds of Prey energy. Now, Mina apparently looks like Count Dracula's dead wife. So in a jealous rage, Dracula turns Jonathan into a vampire who immediately flees and escapes. Mina later is able to escape and follows him. But when they meet up, Jonathan is a little hungry and nom nom eats Mina. So she's dead. He then takes her body back to the village, and the villagers are like, oh no, we must do something. So then they gather together to become the most incompetent hunting party. And I mean incompetent, like so useless. They immediately get taken out by Dracula, and it just leaves the epic vampire battle between Dracula and Jonathan. Mina is now a ghost, and they make this very clear by dousing her hair in a white powder. That's how you know. And she's like, oh no, my boys are fighting. And she throws holy water at them and stabs them both in the heart. Literally the most proactive ghost I have ever heard of. She then stabs herself, Romeo and Juliet style, and dies even though she was already a ghost. The music in this scene was the one I had the issue with because it was a triumphant military piece, but everyone died. I feel like it didn't quite match the vibe. So some questionable choices, but overall it was really well done and we had a good time. Most of the people in my group were thirsting after the dancer who played Dracula. There was also some choreography between Jonathan and Dracula that felt like it was teasing a potential throuple situation, and we were all very disappointed that it did not go down that route. Now on to the Cabaret. So this show was at the Capitol Theatre, which I always describe as it feels like you're inside of a building made of Lego. It is aggressively Art Deco in there. This show had 2 seating times, so a 6:30 and an 8:30. The show itself was an hour long, so that gives the dancers and stagehands only an hour to reset the stage and have a break. And spoiler alert, the stage gets a little messy, especially with glitter. I could not convince anyone else to come to this show with me. I had 0 luck. So I went by myself and I bought a ticket in Zone B, which was in the middle. There's no allocated seating, so what happens is you go to the attendant with the correct colour torch, For zone B, in my case, it was a blue torch. You go up to them and they choose your seat for you. And I got a pretty good seat. I had a really good view. One decision I did really appreciate was, instead of buying a printed out program, they had QR codes in the lobby that you could scan and it would bring up the program on your phone for free, which I really enjoyed and had some light reading before the show started. About 5 minutes before the show started, 2 of the performers came out to sort of like check on stage props, kind of interact with the audience, glare at people, do some poses, that sort of stuff. Now, the premise of this show is that Dracula runs a cabaret club in Transylvania called Le Fang Rouge with his 3 servants who are bound by an eternal contract. And the goal of the evening is to entice the audience with debauchery and choose a new servant from the crowd. They gave this Dracula kind of the same energy as Lucifer from the TV show Lucifer, if you know what I'm talking about, that sort of suave, cheeky playboy kind of energy. The 3 servants were the madam, who had more dominatrix vibe and used a whip, the trickster, who did a lot of Vogue dancing, had a fan, and literally had a shower of glitter at one point, and the innocent. I will preface this by saying that the dancer did a great job. She is very skilled. I hated this character. She ended up kind of being the main character, but was very bratty and annoying. I think we were meant to root for her, but I didn't. I wanted her to lose against Dracula. She apparently signed the servant contract to stop her sister from signing it, and is now bitter about it and is making it everyone else's problem. The actual dance performances use some pretty well-known songs, such as I Put a Spell on You, Bad Romance, S&M, Unholy, Bad Guy, and of course, Pour Some Sugar on Me, which included the previously mentioned glitter shower. They also brought a few audience members up on stage who received free wine for participating and had them do things like a catwalk strutting competition. There was one audience member who came up, and when he was asked what his name was, he said John, and I immediately clocked him as the Jonathan Harker of this story. The program did have a dancer listed as Harker, but he had not shown up yet, so that was an obvious connection for me. However, he played the role of a clueless audience member very well, and it went on for quite a while, to the point that I was actually second-guessing myself, until Dracula decided to use him like a puppet, and John busted out some killer dance moves stylized like he was being controlled by invisible forces. And even though I thought it was rather obvious, I still felt quite vindicated that I saw their reveal coming. Unfortunately, John and the innocent fall in love, and she's trying to convince him to run away before he becomes the new servant. And he's like, "No, I cannot leave without you." Listen, I go to the cabaret for the girls and the gays. If I wanted to watch a cheesy hetero romance, I would watch a Hallmark movie. At least, like, the dance was still good because the performers are very, very skilled. They're, especially John, dang, very good dancer. But bring back the other 2. I want more whips and glitter. Anyway, Dracula wanting to make John the new servant makes the innocent want to try and kill him, and this is where she tried to hype up the crowd to gain the support to kill him. But the crowd didn't seem that into it. The cheers were half-hearted at best. They honestly made Dracula the more likable character, even though he was meant to be the evil villain. So yeah, after the half-hearted cheers, Dracula gets stabbed and dies. And the servants are just fine, even though earlier in the show it was mentioned that if something happened to Dracula, they would also die. But they're just fine. That's the end of the show. That's it. That's the end. The dancers do their little mini dance send off, and that was it. The ending did feel very sudden, but an hour show is not that long, so I can forgive them for that. There was only really two things I was disappointed by, and that was one, Dracula dying, he should have won that fight, and two, the audience. So this seemed to be the type of audience that hadn't really attended shows like burlesque, pole drag, like the type of shows where it's actually encouraged to scream and cheer for the dancers. These performers did actually try to hype up the crowd several times to get some noise from them, and the audience members seemed kind of hesitant at best, and the energy of the crowd can really change up the experience of a show, so hopefully they got a better response from the 8:30 viewing. Okay, so that was my side-by-side look onto very different dance productions inspired by the same source material. I'm not going to say one was better than the other because that really depends on what you want from the experience. One is more elegant with classical music and a story that's very much up to interpretation without the program, and the other is very much campy fun with audience participation, very charming characters, and an ending I very much disagreed with. Oh, and one more thing. At one point, the Madam and the Trickster came out to do a ritual, and they were wearing what I immediately recognized as the winter cloaks from Punk Rave. There wasn't anything you had to know, I just thought it was neat. Okay, bye. Quick book recommendation if you're still here is this one, Carmilla by Sheridan Le Fanu. This was published 25 years before Dracula and is with a female vampire. It has some quite interesting lore, like her main transformation is into a giant black cat, and she can go by other names, but it has to be an anagram of her original name. It's also pretty short. It was originally serialized in a magazine called The Dark Blue, so the chapters are all really digestible length. If you like Gothic literature, I recommend giving it a shot.